So this week, I'm really pleased to have Callum, UEFA A licensed coach, working with professional club Grimsby Town to discuss individual development. So I'll just hand over to Callum now. So Callum, the floor's yours.
Yeah. So I'm going to run through some stuff really quickly. Craig's asked me to work a presentation. I thought this would be an interesting topic on developing individual players, but within the older age groups. So players who are 16, 17 years of age and older. I'm not going to talk about myself massively, but some of you won't be aware of who I am. There's kind of my most relevant qualifications. I take the 18s at Grimsby Town. The 23s is kind of a reserve team, which I'm involved in. I've been taking a lot of those games over the past few seasons, as you can see in the photo with the first team coach at Grimsby, which is Ben Davis. I've done another interesting pathway I've taken. I think one of the people who's on this Zoom meeting is one of the players at Brig, so I'll try not to throw him under the bus too much. A director of football role, which is kind of developing week on week, which started this season. I'll tell you how that fits in with everything later on. Couple of just previous clubs through working in the US for 7 to 8 years, and that's a big part of, I think, what's kind of shaped me is working at a university in the US where I used to play. Different coaches working with, being coached by completely different background to what you would think the ex-player type of coaches in this country and the people have. So some experiences which shape this whole presentation and document. I'm very slow loading onto the next page, so do bear with me if it comes on. Whilst it's coming, find that picture. It's quite funny because there's obviously a wealth of experience within the presentation in terms of the people who are listening, but there's also some people who will be newer to it, some people who are working with under 9s, 10s, 11s, and as some of my colleagues had alluded to, I think it was 6 years ago I worked with the under 9s at Grimsby Town, and that picture was taken on, I believe, the 28th of December 2020, when myself, Ben, and a number of other staff basically helped with the first team. That was a 0-0 draw with Oldham after the manager had left the club. A couple of key bits here, what I just thought were important is everything that I'm going to put in this presentation is transferable to your players and your teams, but you take from it what you want. It won't all be, it's all opinions. Not everything will be for you, but whether you coach under 11s, 12s, or 23s, it's all transferable. I've kind of tried to summarize, I guess, myself before I get into the player development part in how I look at developing players. So there'd be my three kind of headings or main areas. First of all is people. So understanding the players, the staff, their backgrounds, where they come from, what motivates them. There's all kinds of different scenarios, and as I'm sure you all work with people from different backgrounds, different home lives, different abilities, and then transferring that into purpose. So why we're doing what we're doing, and then ultimately in the job I work in, how that then translates into performance. For some of you, it'll be performance will be people enjoying themselves, improving. It still is with the age groups and the players I work with, just the end goal is for them to obviously achieve being a professional footballer and kick on from there. Just put two photos up and I just found them funny. I just keep looking down because I've made a couple of notes. That's just a team we worked with 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I think, and where they are now. So the player who's closest to us playing in the US, University of New Mexico. There's someone in there who's like an online trader doing really well for himself, stocks and shares. The goalkeeper is in his, I think, second or third year as a professional contract, being on the bench a number of times in League Two. The player to his right, Romain Burrell, was sold to Middlesbrough. He came into us from another club. We then sold him. He's just gone on loan to Bradford, actually. There's a player who's next to him. Matty Pollock was a first team player aged 17 and has now made, I think, 60 appearances for the first team and is a regular every week. There's the two kids on the end. One was a pro at the club for a couple of years. The one inside him has been on the bench 7 or 8 times this year and made a number of first team appearances. And there's a couple of more in there. And I've just chucked that picture, which I think's a New York skyline, and funnily enough, there's 11 people on it. And the bit that I've just alluded to, so every single person over both pictures had a completely different way of how they get to where they've got to. Everything that they do affects everybody else who's in their group, and everybody can ultimately, I've put it down to, if they get one thing right or one thing wrong, how that can unsettle or help everybody else develop. These are the more important bits now, and the bits where I would like to think I can give you maybe a couple of ideas, couple of tips, or certainly share some experiences if I can get onto my next page. Here we go, come on. Very slow moving on this next slide. There's quite a lot of information on some of the slides, pictures, videos, and so on. So do just bear with me temporarily. I can tell you what the next ones are about, really, and it's about talking to players and the conversations you have. These are obviously older players. God, I'm having some technical bits here. I do apologise. As you can hear, I'm bashing my keys ferociously, and we're not getting on to the next slide, unfortunately. Do bear with me. It'll probably manage to scramble through all 20 of them in a second. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to load it via my phone so I can talk you through it. I do apologise. I'm just loading it through my phone. To apologise, we didn't have any technical issues when we was going through it earlier.
Always the way.
Okay, so we've the next slide when it appears is, I've called it Honest Talk. So it's about when we talk to players in pre-season or when they first come into the building with us, and what those conversations are about. I've put that they're not chats, the conversations. So we talk to them about a number of things. So where do you see yourself progressing to? What are your kind of goals for the season, career? Because I think it's highlight that they import them early on, so they've got targets to try and achieve, and then more importantly, the what ifs. So one of the big questions I asked them is, what if you was put into the first team tomorrow? I think it's a really difficult question to ask somebody who's 16, 17-year old, but what I think it does is it gets them thinking. And as soon as you can tap into them and get them thinking, then all of a sudden what that does is that they then start thinking, not necessarily outside the box, but a little bit deeper about what they do in their career. And I guess that translates to, if you're working with younger players, how you getting them to think about how they're going to improve or how they're going to become better. So I take one of the players who probably still on your screen as an example, who I said's played a number of games this year, and for the past few years in the first team. Is he? Okay, I have it on my phone so I can actually read off there. We'll get on later. So the what ifs with him were: so what if you drafted into the first team and as a centre back, right-footed, right-sided centre back, and the club already had three of those. So if he was to go into the club, he was probably going to be a left-sided centre back. Um, and him developing his left foot was something he wasn't great at, something he had to develop really quickly. Unfortunately, he did, because he ended up playing within 6 months of joining the program from his release club. Um, and what I've nailed that down to, that there's a slide. I will share them all with you guys after we'll get them emailed to you or whatever, so you can see. And one of the bits for me was identifying areas that he needed to improve. So he was certainly struggling with some areas, but there were some massive assets he had. And I think the assets that he had is the things that put him in the first team. So very, very powerful in the air, reads the game very well as a centre back at such a young age. But the bits that he didn't do well, and this is where you'll see through slides later, is the key points is players like honesty. They don't always like it when you give it to them immediately, but they like honesty because they know where you stand with them. The next slides were around like the individual development plan. So what we do is we then, after all these conversations, sit down with the players and start coming up with a plan of what they need to improve, what they do well, and what they can continue to get better at. Because what we don't want to do is lose sight of what they do well. So if we just continually work on the bits they're not very good at, we lose the bits that got them to where they are in the first place. Whereas if we continue to make their strengths even better, that might be the bit that gets them in the team. As long as the bits that aren't their strongest areas, they continue to improve, deal with, cope with, I guess, um, what we don't want to do is ultimately take away somebody's best attributes. So we've nailed it down. So I keep looking down, just referring to some notices. They we use some templates around a specific objective. So somebody developing the range of passing might be the objective. How they can achieve it. So we'll design a number of skills, drills, little things what they can do on their own or in small groups, and then we'll explain to them why they need that attribute. We'll explain to them when they get the opportunity to do it and how it's measured. So it might be measured by watching video back and ultimately coach and player just coming up with a visual feedback of, we think you've got better at this, we don't think you've got better at it, here's some good examples, here's some not so good examples. And then we have some other elements which are the self-graded, a lot of the stuff that we do. So we want the players to grade themselves over a period of time if they've improved. And I think that's massive because before I tell the player what I think, I want them to tell me what they think. Because ultimately, if we just give them a number, for example, a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being good, and I give them a 3, they'll generally put a 3 to appease you. This is what I think the coach wants to hear, this is what I put. Whereas if they already have told you, you can then maybe be a little bit more honest with that feedback. And then I've nailed it down to kind of 3 points of sit down, review, and progress. So a sit down meeting to have a look at those, review then where we are, what the difference is between the coach and what the player is saying, and then we can then progress to what we need to do then to move that up to a higher level. Because all the time, what we're trying to do is encourage players to be lifelong learners. Um, there's a key point slide that you'll see, and one of the biggest things I found when working with these players of this age is having a two-way communication stream. So we're very, very conscious that, or I certainly am, that not just giving players information and trying to give them more of an opportunity to speak. You find, I think, when you're working with players who get older, they want to tell you what they think as well. Sometimes you have to squeeze it a little bit more, I think, out of the younger players. But, um, well, I think I've put in brackets some of the older players. Here we go. Are we in here? Can we see this?
Alan, I've just got your presentation up. I'll just scroll down for you. Is that right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah, is
Just
that
scroll
better?
down. We scroll down a little bit more. Keep going. Keep going. If you scroll, yeah, keep going. Here we go. So that was the development plan I was talking about. That's perfect. Thank you. Development plan I was talking about. So an objective. We'll make all this stuff available to you. How we can achieve it, why we do it, when we do it, and how we're going to do it. Um, but the player objective line that you can see, that's probably the biggest one, because for us, that is what's going to make them or break them at the level what we're working at. But you can see in there's all different ways of measuring it. So it might just be through a review or assessment, might be self-reflection, could just be coach feedback. Obviously, the physical stuff we can get GPS or fitness testing data. We scroll down a little bit further, please, Craig. Beautiful. This is the one I was talking about. Sorry, where we just about got to where they're ultimately grading themselves on a scale. They've highlighted, this is the player themselves highlighting what they think 10 key areas are. I've used a centre back here, for example. They identify players. They can obviously watch them back. There's a little bit of exchange sometimes of YouTube clips or games you've seen at the weekend. And I think it's just so important that they're constantly reviewing what they're doing. So we're not missing any gaps out in their performance. We're going, if you have a really busy schedule of 2 games a week or 3 in 8 days, that I can generally miss stuff. So you've done well, we've won 2-0, let's move on to the next one. But there might be some real important information in that game, or something specific that we've worked on, or what they didn't do what we want them to work on. So these are just like really easy templates what you're free to use, and or you create your own, whatever it is. I appreciate if you're working with maybe grassroots team for an hour a week, that you're not going to go into all of that detail. But what you can do is you can just chuck maybe a challenge out to a player at the start of the week or start of the month, and we want you to get better at your heading, for example. On a scale of 1 to 5, what do you think it is? Oh, it's a 1. Well, if we do this and work it and so on, and maybe give them a drill they can practice at home, or we're still giving players things that they can practice outside of stuff, generally more physical work. And then at the end of the month, it's a 2. Okay, well, it's improved. How do we get it to a 3? And we can keep adding elements to it and make it better. Will you scroll down again, please, Craig? Magic. This is a really important one for us. This is all player led, nothing to do with the coaches. So they just fill it in themselves. We just get to see it, and it's so what's going to stop you then progressing to the next level? We've put a plan in action. You've got your playing ability. You've got your schedule of training and games. What are the bits that I can't ultimately control when you're um, when you leave the gates and then when you come back in the gates the next day? So everyone knows what the modern world's like with regards to kids on phones and not sleeping right and fast food, whatever the scenario is. People seem to have this thing in the head that um, like elite footballers don't necessarily have bad habits. They do. Um, so it's if we go right back to the very start where we talked about the three key strands that I work to, which is the first one's people. So you've got to know what every individual person is like, or certainly get to know them in the role that we do. Will you go down one, please, Craig? That was where I'd obviously where Craig took over is have the two-way communication with them, talk to them. Don't be a stand on the side of the pitch and when they come into training and you set up. I think it'd be like your arrival activity is what people refer to it as, and they go on there and you just stand and watch. Pull them over, have those little 1v1 conversations. I've written down in my notes that we have to do a lot of work, and a number of people on this chat will where we record these reviews and assessments. But the best conversations are the ones what we have in the corridor, or the ones what we have when the kids are having and the players are having a drink, and maybe 5 minutes before a game or 10 minutes after the game. You see all this stuff online of I seen one today, and it was Guardiola's like not having an argument, but a discussion with a player 5 minutes after full time on the pitch. And people go, oh, it's for show and so on. I don't think it is. I think it's that both the player and coach are in the moment, and that's such a important part of um, getting people to learn is doing things as they've happened and in the moment. You go on a coaching course and that you have your 4 key points or whatever it is, and whatever happens in that session, you're going to put them 4 key coaching points in. When sometimes, and the more I've certainly coached, I've got what the key information I want to get out, but if that doesn't happen, we don't force it. Something else might happen, and we need to address that. So those are really important. Certainly, this two-way communication. Like I said, some players will say a lot more than others, but you'll learn that as you learn the people. We go to the next slide, Craig. These are the bits what I think you guys will be not necessarily more interested in, but maybe more relatable to. So I've put this kind of individual training. So this is my first bit. I've spoke to them in the classroom or the office. Here's what I want you to do. Here's how we want to do it. Here's what we're agreeing. Now we're on the field. So there's 3 elements to this. One's football based. So if we can work on the player's strengths, as we've said, great. We've got to spend time working on the areas they've got to improve as well. We've also got to, and this is the more important bit, if I can get 2 people working on something at the same time, then great. So this is based around a centre defender. If I can get a goalkeeper in and he's working on maybe dealing with crosses, that's a big part of the game in terms of how many times have you seen keeper come out, centre defender still heads it, or goalie goes to punch it, run into people. So it's individual training, and my main focus is on the centre back, but the goalie coach might be stood behind the goal, or the assistant coach might be stood on the side talking about the delivery the number seven's going to put in and so on. So that's one element. We try to get 2 30-minute sessions of that a week when we can. We've obviously struggled a bit more with training time due to weather and COVID restrictions and so on. So that's the first element of it. Will you go down one, Craig, please? The second element is obviously gym-based training. Uh, so you've seen obviously these learning plans at the start. Every player has an individualized program. So again, what they're good at and how they're going to get better at it, areas they need to improve. Try to get 2 sessions a week on site, and then depending on what they need, 1 to 2 sessions off site. And then they'll have a daily like prehab or activation program. Some people might do that pre-session, as in 10 minutes before they go on. I've got a player at the minute who's had some groin issues, so he's ultimately, he needs to be 10 minutes before we start warming up doing his exercises as a bit of injury prevention. You've obviously got the recovery elements to that. If you scroll down one more, Craig, this is like the field-based stuff, which, as you can see, I just put a player. He done a couple of sessions with us. He was a first team player, but he had a very serious ACL injury, so he ended up coming and training with us to get up to speed before he went back in. And I'm just, the amount of sheer just running, stretching, everything he did to get himself up to the level was unbelievable. And then everybody's favourite session in the bottom right, where all the players are laid down and everyone goes, geez, that was hard work. There's some great sessions, just more, not necessarily just mental um, development, but sorry, not just physical development, mental development as well. And kind of, I guess, developing a team and that everybody can see these, how hard everybody. A week on site, off site means you doing it by yourself, as in you're going out for a run, what you've been given. Obviously, we've been doing a lot more of that recently, but incorporating it into the sessions is something we've done a lot more, and kind of the next part of this presentation, because the reason why that's really important is the kind of correlating with the sports science team. So I get that a lot of you won't have sports scientists, but so if they're not training as regular, and I know through, for example, the semi-professional club is, we incorporate a lot of our physical work into just the design and area size of a game, for example. So we know that these are the returns we want. We don't have GPS, we can't measure it. So we need to make the pitch bigger. Well, I'll talk about that. If you scroll down for us, please, Craig, that'll kind of get into the next element. This is just one add on, it'll be 30 seconds. Just some of the stuff that we're exposing the kids to. We took them on a 1 month cooking course, because most of them are living either in a family housing, or when they become a first year professional player and stuff, you're on your own and you're renting a house and whatever. And the amount of people who can't put pasta in a pan is unbelievable. But so we formed a link with a local college, got them. So these are basic meals, what are cheap, what you can prepare for yourself, and great for pre-match meals. So they learned how to make, I think it was sweet potato wedges. Some of the staff will be laughing because we did it as a master chef event, and they had to waiter and make all the dishes for first team players, first team managers, staff, and so on. So much stuff in that, like when you talk about leadership and working together in something what they're so unfamiliar with, and it was excellent. And some of the kids are still talking about it now, so that's great. We have psychology workshops. Very fortunate. I've worked with some people who have seen Jamie Edwards work with Gareth Bale and big stars and all that. Like, he comes in and does some workshops with the players. And he did actually, I think, a 12-week block of work during the first lockdown with scholars from all over the country. And I would imagine most people agree it's one of the largest components of the modern game. I think you're getting all these technical players, everyone's physically highly tuned, and the psychological bit is now the bit that everybody's putting this importance on. And then I guess just like the banking and money sense, you wouldn't believe the amount of people who don't know what a national insurance is, how to open a bank account, the amount of conversations where I'm going to move into my own place and I'm going to do that, and they don't understand that you all the bills that you have to pay in council tax. Well, I don't want to pay council tax, unfortunately, and man, you have to pay council tax or you'll be out of your house, and the budgeting and all that type of stuff. So we're trying to make them more well-rounded. That won't be as relevant for some people as other. We scroll down, please, Craig. We're coming towards some of the latter parts, but the real session planning elements now. So my key point for that is when we talk about the individual work, gym-based, field-based, football-based, work at what you need to improve on, but don't forget what you're good at. Somebody told me that Emil Heskey, when he was at Leicester City, was unbelievable, and then gets this move to Liverpool. And Liverpool, they played him up there with Michael Owen generally, and then kind of formed that partnership at England level. But Emil Heskey was fantastic at running in behind and scoring goals and was so powerful. And then he went to Liverpool and England and then was scoring about 5 to 10 goals a season when he'd scored 25, which is what got him the move, because everything became so focused on his hold-up play, because technically he wasn't very good. So he ended up being very good at it, obviously, but the bit that actually got him to where he got to, he then lost the goal scoring part. So I think it's being very careful and striking up a fine balance. We move down, Craig. We're not far off, guys. We'll be able to get a drink in a minute. Here's one of the more important parts. So practice design, so that you can get these players to do what you want to do. It's a team effort because it is. One or two of my colleagues are sat in this meeting and we talk regular. You see the middle one, we share stuff over WhatsApp. The image on the right is at what everyone's doing modern day and we're doing right now is sharing your screen over Zoom, unless it freezes like mine, and designing sessions that way. There's one on the left which is players integrating maybe more of a review, but us then looking just through, we use a Subbuteo table, or we can't get players even that close to each other in a building anymore, but that's what we had been doing previously. So what we actually spend probably more time planning it than what we do on the field coaching it. So there's a couple of phrases I use which will come out, or there'll be towards the end of this bit. Will you go down one, Craig? And this is kind of how we get to where we want. So this isn't staged for this presentation or anything like that. This is literally a session I think I did last Wednesday, linked to we was playing a game on Saturday. So we looked at some basic patterns. That was how it worked. That was how the session started. Again, linking this to an individual player and how that individual player is going to get better. The person who's starting with the ball for me in this was the centre back. So that's his forward passing to midfield. The two wider ones, midfield players, wide players, forward players, their movements then to go and get the ball. So you're coming short, you're going long, you're spinning wide. There's obviously more, technical detail when we're actually doing the session, but I'm trying to show you the process of how we plan it rather than what we say in it. We can talk about some of that stuff later on. Here we go down to the next one, Craig. So then how we put those patterns then into a possession type session, or getting to it. So we've basically gone for a 3v2 in each half with two neutral players into end zones. So ultimately, when you've got the ball, it's 5v2. So you should have a fair amount of success in one half at getting the ball out. And then when you progress the ball into the other half, generally in a game, a little bit harder. So it could be 3v3 or 4v3. And our main focus was on getting people, I guess, passing forwards, looking forwards, running forwards. So we just use an end zone. It's nothing you've never seen before. If you go down to the next one, Craig, this is, and then how we moved it into the next element. Again, I get it all the time. I don't have 22 players to work with every day. I don't have this ideal first team Chelsea training ground. This is what we've got. Sometimes we've got smaller areas to work in because at the minute part of the training ground had been flooded because of the weather we've been having. We have sessions where some players have played 90 minutes and then we've got 7 players the next day. So everyone has their own issues. This was just as simple as, so now we come into a possession session. Now what we need is the team movement within that. So we're not just talking about an individual player getting in behind the opposition. We're talking about if he can get into that end zone, where are the two where it's a step up? Well, the defenders need to move up the pitch and midfielders need to move up the pitch and where they go. So you should start seeing a link between it all. What I can do, or over the next few days via social media, is I'll post some moving images of the session. And then when you get the moving images of the session, you'll see it come to life a little bit more. Will you go to the next one for us, please, Craig? Then it's like putting it into a game scenario. So we basically had a 1v1 at the back. I'll talk about that in the next part. 2 blue screening midfielders in the middle with an up against a number 10. We had and then a heavy overload in the other half where people could go and join in. So 2 teams working completely opposite. That was to try and replicate what our game would be Saturday. So if the Reds could regain the ball in their half of the field, the other team would be open and expansive. And then what that'd allow us to do is ultimately counter-attack because they'd leave low numbers at the back. But you would be playing against screening midfielders who'd really sit in front and try and stop balls going in. So we might have to then go through kind of the number 10 in that middle section. You'll see, I will explain in this last picture, if you can scroll down, Craig, the how this links to individual development. Okay, so if you look at the red player with a dashed arrow coming off him, this would be, for example, a centre back. So you can see the pitch is 18-yard box to. I've done it as full size just so you can see the difference. So one half is smaller than the other. If I'm working with that red centre back, I've put that area and land space behind him because might not be the quickest, might not be great on the turn, might need to be better at reading the game. The blue player with the dashed arrows coming off him is my centre forward who's lightning quick, who wants to run in behind. So I'm giving the red defender problems to deal with. That's how we've used the individual development within a team session. So if I flipped that and my defender who needs to improve those elements was the one receiving it off the goalkeeper, he's never going to face that problem because no one's ever going to get in behind him because there's no space. My centre forward, who's the blue player, if it was a centre forward against him, who needs to work on timing his runs, which was the first element you saw in terms of the patterns that were shown. Well, he ain't going to do that because there isn't any space either. Now, you could flip it and say that the defender is receiving the ball in this instance, he doesn't have the space behind him. is athletic, doesn't struggle on the turn, positions himself well, he might struggle with the quick and clever play around him. The red centre forward might struggle with the terms we've used, his hold up play, tight situations, laying it off, spinning. So just by changing the size of the pitch and where we're putting people on the pitch, that creates the problems that develops them individually. So it isn't, again, it's nothing you've never seen before. It is literally I think it's whatever it is, a 7v5 game with two goalkeepers. But the constraints you put on those players, if I just did that 18 to 18 yard box and moved the other goal up, that wouldn't necessarily propose as many as those of those problems. I could leave somebody 1v1 if them being exposed doesn't necessarily hurt them as long as you coach them, help them get better. Do you want to go down, Craig? We are getting near to the end, guys. We'll open up some questions. So talk about planning, and I'm open to questions and stuff at the end. I think every session should be a masterclass. So imagine now if you was going to do your UEFA B or UEFA A license final assessment as it was, you put so much time planning into that, and then you go and you make sure everything's right. That it's like they're like a driving test, but nobody now drives like they did when it was the driving test. But it should be a masterclass because you're trying to inspire the players every day you work with them or every time you work with them. So every session should be planned out to the highest level. Every session we do with analysis in the classroom should be perfect, not like my bad example of not being able to move on a slideshow, um, because that doesn't replicate the professionalism of what you want for the players. So shouldn't be somebody clicking from minute 1 to minute 30 of a video. It should be bang there straight away, right? Skips from one bit to the next, for example. So we do end up spending more time planning, but the reason being is because we want it to be perfect for the players as much as possible. Don't get me wrong, sometimes it's going to be messy, it ain't going to go to plan. They're all parts of coaching and dealing with it, but that's what we're striving for. These bits we'll get through a little bit quicker. We just go down, Craig, please. So the games program. Yeah, so I've got a pathway of where I get players who come in at 16-year-old, sign a 2-year scholar, and my job's to try and get them into the first team. If they become a first team player for 500 games, if we sell them to Man United, whatever happens, that's the aim of where we're trying to get them to. I don't want any of them players on there to be a Grimsby Town first team player for 15 years. If they are, great. I want them to go and play as high a level football as they can and have the best career they can. Now, some players that will be Grimsby Town first team football, which is great, and that serves a massive purpose of what we do. But the other part of it is their individual progression. We go down for us, Craig. I will try and share this video at the end. And the reason I've put it is we haven't had loads of exposure to this, and some people haven't. But I know at grassroots football, not so much now, you get these opportunities to go on these European tours and do these things, go play tournaments abroad and that. Do it. The Dutch there, I remember this Dutch guy before this game saying to us, whatever that says, and it translates to how good are you? I will show you the clip later on. It's so good for players being exposed to something they're not used to. A lot of your games that you play Saturday mornings, Sunday mornings are very, very similar. This was such a different experience when we went over there and played. It was fantastic. Players absolutely loved it, and the team that season was the picture that I showed you earlier. What we were stuck on for 15 minutes. They actually went on and won the league, and that is nothing to do with me. It was a great group of players, and this trip just set them up. It was so good. I talked to some of the kids now who've played 60 games in the first team, and they still talk about it. and these games we play. We're playing teams like Vitesse Arnhem and stuff like that, and it was a great experience for them. There was so much that they got from it, from style of play, exposure to what like foreign referees are like, and so on. And I would love some of these players to go and sign for a club who were going to be in the Europa League one day, or go and play abroad, or whatever it is. While I'm on that, there's somebody else who's in this meeting currently, and he played in a youth team at Grimsby Town. I would say uh, probably 8-10 years ago, and there was a player who played with him who then went to Spain and then played for when he was a first year pro at Grimsby Town, went to Spain and then ended up at like Valencia B and Granada and places like that. So it does happen. Ryan Bennett was Grimsby Town, and he played Europa League for Wolves 2 seasons ago, and then went to Leicester and so on. He came through the academy. So exposing people to it is absolutely fantastic. We go down one for us, Craig. Uh, this is a big part of our program. Players going on loan. So because ultimately you go from 18 straight to the first team, the 23s group is more a how would I put it? Just a league. They don't have loads of training sessions necessarily together. They're entered into a reserve league. So to bridge that gap for those who aren't quite ready, got some links with local clubs, send them out. You can see here that there's a young man running away who was in the team that I showed you, who went out on loan. But the player who stood behind him, and the reason I use the picture, is a 36-year-old striker who's played about 700 Football League games, who was actually at Grimsby for 2 or 3 seasons as well, and played generally at League One, League Two career, I think Scottish Premier League and stuff. Scott Vernon, you'll have heard of him, he still lives local, great man, but what a good person for him to go and learn off. So that's the experience, not just going and playing men's football and it being physically tough and all this, but playing and being around those players when you're not quite ready to go into the first team. So that's a massive part for us. We scroll down, Craig. We are nearly there. I think there's 2 more slides. This is a big one. I've put Blinded by the Lights. That's one of, he was an academy product. He's played over 100 games in the first team now. That's away at Crystal Palace in the FA Cup about 3 seasons ago. And I know that there's been a couple more high profile games like that for a club, but I've put Blinded by the Lights because I remember us having an FA Youth Cup game on the first team pitch and 7 p.m. kickoff night game. I think we ended up losing 3-2. I'm talking to the players the day after, and I said, "Oh, well, we were unlucky, blah, blah, blah. How'd you find it?" He goes, "I've never played under lights before." And I was like, "You're kidding me." So his first game was this like FA Youth Cup game, all hyped up, and he'd never played under floodlights. Hence the reason why I put Blinded by the Lights, because the same player then played, I think it was last season in the second round of the Carabao Cup, away at Chelsea in front of 40,000. It was a sellout at Stamford Bridge. And it's like, so if he hadn't had the exposure of going and playing that game under the lights in front of 150 people, his first experience might have been in front of 40,000 people at Stamford Bridge, having to man Mark Batshuayi it was in that game. So we've got to give him that exposure, or you can't expect him to do it. We go down one more for us, Craig. This is the last one, guys. Here's a player who we worked with really hard. He was in one of the earlier pictures. So this young man came into us having been released by a Category 2 club, not backed by everybody at our level, and we took a chance on him. Came in, really struggled. He would even say so himself for the first 4 or 5 months. And at the end of his scholar, so he played 5 or 6 first team games as a scholar, and at the end, in the summer, he was sold to Middlesbrough. He was then Middlesbrough's top goal scorer in their under-23s, and he made his first team debut in the FA Cup against Brentford not so long ago. So this is my thing is that's the pathway I've shown you, us going and playing a little tournament abroad to then somebody's ultimately playing, albeit FA Cup championship level football. So for all players it's possible. I alluded to earlier myself, and there'll be loads of other people on it, myself as a coach 6 years ago. um, Lawrence, who's on this meeting, brought me in as the under nines coach at Grimsby Town, coming back from the US. And then just over a month ago, I was with the first team when the manager left the club for the game at Boxing Day away at Morecambe, and then the draw at home against Oldham before the new management come in. That's just in the space of 6 years. So we just go down one more for us, Craig. That would be my big thing is don't expect players to be able to do stuff they've never been exposed to, but they will always surprise you. Players will always surprise you. That's what I found I like doing.